Hello, everybody. Can you hear us okay? Would anybody like to confirm? Sorry, we're starting a few minutes late. Hi, Jonathan. Good to see you. All righty. Sorry again, we're a few minutes late. We'll jump right in. Thank you for joining us. We're going to talk today about collaborative cash collection. Webinar should be about 30 to 40 minutes. It will be recorded, so if you missed something, you're welcome to check out the replay. And please, we invite you to ask questions, make comments. We'll address those all at the end. I think there's about, 55 or 60 people joining us today, so thanks a lot. We're lucky to be joined by Veraset. I'll let them introduce themselves in a second, but they have implemented some really good cash collection processes. And they're going to share their story. So thanks for having us. I'm Charlie. I'm a payment expert here at Upflow. I don't want to talk too much about us, but we are a B2B payment platform that allows companies to get paid easier and transact with their customers better. And I'm joined by Nicole and Emma from Veraset. So why don't you guys introduce yourselves?
Yeah, thanks for having us. So my name is Emma Swanson, and I run our operations over at Veraset.
And then my name's Nicole Tilley, and I'm the Director of Customer Success at Veraset.
Right. So I think the format, what we're going to do is we're going to talk at a high level about how you guys can involve different areas of your team in the cash collection process at a high level. And then we'll gather some insights from Veraset and what they've experienced and how they've evolved their processes over time. So just to preface what we're talking about here, we're talking about the order to cash cycle, right? It's a lot longer of a process than people really think. Sometimes, you make the order, the sale, you send the invoice, and then you wait to get paid. But realistically, it's a long, drawn-out process. It can take upwards of 90 days. And if you have hundreds of invoices over the period of a month, that can really add up and you can get buried. So Veraset, Emma, Nicole, what does your process look like? What tools do you use to complete this cycle? And who do you involve in the process? At a high level, we'll dig into some details a bit later on.
Sure. So our process largely follows this model on this slide. I would say that right now, the tools that we are using are a combination of Upflow and QuickBooks and Bill.com for payments. So just using those three simple tools. I'll say that some of the biggest time sucks that we faced before integrating some more automation really fell on tracking communication. So sending the invoice is the easiest part. Everything that comes after is a little bit more difficult.
Right. Very good. Very good. So yeah, as we dig into kind of the meaty part of that cash to order to cash cycle, the ideal cash collection, we think there's really four imperative steps that businesses should take. Obviously, you need to know the status of the invoice, right? Whether it's due, overdue, whether it's been paid. A really big thing is understanding your customers, right? At Upflow, we think that there are different typologies. You have late paying customers, reliable customers, strategic accounts, so you have to give a little extra tender love and care. Do you guys, Emma and Nicole, do you guys have a way to like identify these different types of customers, or how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So at Veraset, we definitely work with a wide variety of customers across many different types of industries, as well as organization sizes. And so, depending on each type of company that we're working with, they might have very different structures of their own finance teams. And the major benefit we have with working with Upflow that I absolutely love, and I know Emma loves too, is that we've been able to build out that standardized communication process. And then with each of those touch points, and in our general process, we have about 10, where, depending on that client's payment schedule and how we work with them, then they're able to receive custom communications that automatically go out. And if they're paying sooner, then they always stay in that upper funnel. And then the more sensitive clients or clients we have to partner with more closely, start to then move lower into the funnel where we're talking to them on a more frequent cadence.
Right. And you kind of mentioned the third step of the ideal cash collection, which is following up on the payments, right? Like a lot of companies just send 2 or 3 and then they move on. And we usually like to say that there really is no ideal number of touch points, right? You do it until you get paid. And then, of course, at the end, you're measuring your efficiency with different systems. How did you guys do that when you first started kind of improving your cash collection process? Like what kind of ways did you evaluate how well it's going? And then like, what did you actually conclude?
Sure, that's a good question. So at first, when we were just using QuickBooks, we heavily relied on reports to figure out what was going well based on that outstanding number for overdue invoices. So we largely relied on that and doing our own analysis, which was pretty time consuming and lengthy. When we were able to implement and integrate Upflow, it made it so much easier to diversify the reports we were looking at, access information easier, and really see how the overall process was improving our bottom line number.
Right, right. Very good. Yeah. Awesome. Well, again, we've got a lot to get to here, so we're going to move on. So when we look at a lot of organizations, 95% of the time, this is what we see. It's a fairly siloed approach between the different stakeholders, right? You have an AR specialist, someone in the finance, doesn't have to be an AR specialist, whoever actually is like tracking down the payments and reconciling the payments. And oftentimes they have no means of communication or leverage with people like you, Nicole, or your sales reps and customer success. And these people can really offer a lot of insight to the AR specialist or the person in the finance division. And then also, the finance team or your C-levels don't necessarily have visibility over the actions that the finance user is taking. And then the third relationship we see is that oftentimes the sales and customer success teams don't have the same objectives as the finance team, right? So like the sales are really concerned about making the sell, not necessarily getting paid. And success teams, Nicole, you can attest to this. They really want to be, they want to bring their customers good news. They don't want to get involved in payments. Is this something that you guys saw in your organization at first, or maybe in companies you've worked with in the past, kind of the siloed approach?
Yeah, so when we had first started kind of really evaluating our process and how we were doing things, we very much had siloed communications. Not everyone who needed to be involved was involved, and there was no clear ownership. And so when redoing this process, one of our main goals was to make sure everyone who is affected by collections and accounts receivables is involved and has some kind of transparency. So throughout this process, we wanted to make sure, people can access Upflow, for example, to even with account reps and C-level, it's really great for them to see where the status of invoices are, especially for new customers. And from a customer success level, it was really helpful when Nicole, for example, is going into renewal conversations. And overall, having more transparency was a huge improvement that we were able to implement. I would say that at first, we kind of had this good cop, bad cop relationship in our process. And what we found is it was really, the reason we weren't collecting as quickly was really on us. So we just didn't have the right tools in place for our customers to access the information they needed in order to make payments. And so once we optimized our process and really refined it, we found that we were collecting payments so much quicker, and we actually gave the customers a tool to effectively keep their accounts up to date.
Right. Yeah. It's not that these three parties can't interact, don't want to. It's just that the process is never really implemented. And once it is, it's kind of smooth sailing, which brings us to this. Voila. This is kind of what we think is like a perfect triangle of a collaborative approach where all three units are on the same page. There's common alignment. There's reporting available. And this triangle is kind of what we're going to dig into in the second half of the webinar here. So getting into the meat of things, 4 big questions that we teased you into this webinar for. Why should you collaborate around cash collection? who should you involve in the process? When should they get involved in the process? And how do you actually get all of these people to work in synchronization? Because it sounds like it can be a tough task with all these moving parts, right? So who to involve and why? We like to think there's 4 main stakeholders. It varies by organization depending on size, right? But like there's 4 big ones. You have the finance team, account executives or sales, customer success, and your C-levels. They kind of operate on 2 different spectrums we've lined out here, different levels of influence and authority over your customers. You know, the account execs and customer success people like Nicole would generally have like an established rapport with customers, so they might be able to have different influence. A CEO obviously carries a lot of authority with them, whereas a back office finance user might not. And then specialized customer knowledge, again, like the sales rep knows the sales terms and can communicate that to the finance user. So again, like we've touched on it a bit, but in detail, like who in Veraset is involved in this process for you guys?
Sure. So for Veraset, who we've involved, so we have a number of parties involved. I would say largely these people are who we involve, plus the operational side. So I'm on the operations side, and I work very closely with the finance team to oversee the platforms, track payments, and operate more on the logistics side. And then we also have our customer success really driving the communications, and account executives and C-level with more visibility. And Nicole, you can elaborate more on your involvement with the process.
Yeah, I would just chime in to say that, you know, when we think about our relationships with the accounts, it's really important to make sure that, you know, we have our original deal with them that was closed by the sales team, and then the relationship that customer success is carrying forward. And then for the health of both of our businesses, a component of that is that we need to also be receiving payments for the services that we deliver. So because of that, we're able to then, you know, use Upflow to automate the communications that are initially coming from me. Yeah. And from there, we do escalate them to our C-level executives for, you know, maybe a particularly late payment. Right. And then the platform itself gives transparency to, you know, Emma and operations overseeing everything, and then also our finance team syncing with QuickBooks. And so through that process, it really lets us have just an organized communication front and a consistent face to the client, where we holistically look at our relationship.
Right. Yeah. And we'll get into the escalation process in a minute, because that's what people often think about when they think about like following up on cash collection. It's interesting. You guys have your CEO involved, any other C-levels that are involved. And then what type of visibility are they looking for? Are they looking for specific metrics, or how do they interact in the platform specifically?
Sure. So our CEO and CTO really like looking into the platform for the reporting function. So one of the big metrics, I would say the 2 big metrics that we all focus on and discuss with them are the DSO, so days outstanding, and then the overall outstanding AR number. Very good. Very good.
Yeah, we'll touch on those later. For those of you who don't know what DSO is, it's basically a fancy calculation for how long it takes you to get paid, but we think it's the #1 metric that you know, you should be following in your cash collection to measure the effectiveness of it. So when should these stakeholders get involved in the process? There's kind of like 2 levels. There's the macro, which is like the order to cash cycle, and then when do they get involved in the escalation process? So like the order to cash cycle, when we look at this, obviously, like they have different ways that they are involved. So like some of them are taking like direct actions, like sending escalations or triggering a sale. Others are just getting visibility of that step. Do your sales teams get involved in this at all? Maybe at the beginning of the process, or how do they fit into this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So initially, when a sales team brings on a new deal, the client has agreed to us with some type of payment schedule. And so the sales team will introduce them with a financial welcome packet that explicitly mentions that they'll be receiving communications from Upflow. And so that, receiving that first payment, getting them set up in their systems, making sure they have our W-9, that's all a part of our initial onboarding process where the sales team is involved. And then from there, on an ongoing payment basis, then the communications are, coming from me, overseen by Emma, and then escalated, hopefully rarely, to our executive leadership team.
Right. Yeah. Very good. Yeah, no, it's interesting that the sales team gets involved then. Very good. Okay.
Yeah, and I guess, while you change slides, I'd just say, I think the transparent communication between us and our clients, and just giving them the expectation that there is going to be this very transparent and open communication around this from the very beginning, really helps make sure that, we avoid late payments as much as possible.
Yeah. I actually lost my train of thought there. That's exactly what I wanted to say, is like, it's often overlooked that like setting the expectation for your customer at the beginning of this process, right, at the new sale before the invoice is issued, is just as critical as having like a really cemented process for following up, right? Which is what you mentioned. So thanks for reminding me that, Nicole. Thank you. All right. So we look into the escalation process. Again, we touched on some of this already. Again, so you have like a standard, just like sending your first reminder, right? That some people like to say it's automated, others not. A warm personalization, right? Maybe it's, your salesperson, or again, someone in finance. A colder personalization, someone from sales who's not as worried as a customer success person might be about being really delicate with the customers. And then, like you said, like your C-level does come in. I had a question for you, Nicole, because it's really interesting for a customer success person to get involved in this, right? Like when we look at warm personalization versus like firm or cold, do you have like any cognitive dissonance when you're going into this, right? Like you're really concerned about putting on a good face to your customers, but also it's kind of a touchy subject. Like, where do you stand on this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think initially I did have some concerns, like we talked about earlier. It's much easier to always deliver very good news to clients than to, need to ask them for something.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the way I've been able to get through that, and really working with Emma to help build out the process so that it's just standardized. But, within the process, that adds a lot of support and makes it much easier. And then also just thinking about the fact that for the overarching health of our company, we need both the client relationship, but that relationship is two ways in terms of, what we're delivering to them and then what they should be paying back to us. And so looking at the relationship as an overarching unit, I think makes it much easier to broach that type of discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And we do our absolute best to work with our clients very fairly.
Right.
And we've certainly been through an incredibly trying time globally over the past half a year. And so, Upflow lets us keep track of these situations where we work with our accounts,
right.
To find a way that we can keep working together in the future.
Right. Do you think that like your customers kind of catch on to an escalation process, like maybe ones that you've like carried out like further along down a workflow? Like, do you think that having that established kind of reliable follow-ups, does that trigger any type of like action when future payments come on down the road?
Oh, we've absolutely seen improvements in our metrics. And
Yeah.
Emma and I love to follow our stats in Upflow. I have the tab open all the time, and I just refresh it for fun sometimes throughout the day to see if anything's improved. And so in that days, the DSO metric, that really gives us a sense of seeing over time how that's improved. And, we also look at the bar chart that shows how many days overdue particular invoices are. And it's really nice to see, a very steep decline in that chart. And I think that's an indication of clients, getting on board with the rhythm of those notifications and payment deadlines.
Right. So for all you really competitive people, it's fun once you have metrics, it's fun to follow along, right? Like I know I'm really competitive and love numbers. So like I feel like once I see the numbers start going down, like I want to work hard to keep it going. So very cool.
Yeah, we have a weekly tracker, and then sometimes we celebrate in a Slack channel.
There you go.
Really notable wins, so it's pretty fun.
Who knew collecting cash could be, I mean, it is fun to get cash, right? But it can be fun, celebratory. So we're getting to kind of the crown jewel slide here. So like, how do you make this all work? I mean, I know you've mentioned Upflow a lot, but like, I kind of want to explore the other conventional tools that are available. And like, I'm sure you guys have used them like in prior experiences or at Veraset kind of in your early stages when you were trying to optimize your cash collection process. So in this pyramid, we started like, you know, how do people work in synchronization? How do people share information and work together to collect cash more efficiently? Obviously, you had the good old fashioned water cooler. Like that was really good in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, right? Just exchanging information. Slack kind of falls into that as well. Obviously, a more recent development, but just like an informal way to share communication, but it's not really stored or structured. Email and Excel working our way up. They're collaborative, but they're not necessarily real time, and they can be difficult to access and maintain. Meetings are great, right? Because you can assign clear actions. But there's once you set it, it's kind of a static measure. There's no visibility of like where, you know, if the action has been completed. And then there's dedicated tool, which has, you know, real time, single source of truth, workflow capabilities, keeping everyone in the loop. What do you guys think of these? So like, do you think you've worked your way up this pyramid at Veraset, or like, what do you think are some of the pros and cons of some of these? Because some of these do work really well, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think when we had first started this, we were very heavily relying on tools like Slack and email and doing I think we did 1 to 2 meetings a week when we had first started taking on redesigning this process and figuring out how we could get a handle on our overdue invoices. And it was so painful because with Slack and email, it's so easy to forget about those communications or forget to CC someone on a thread, forget to forward something. And with Slack, it's so easy to just click on something, not read it, and then it just goes away. So as we've progressed and been able to really centralize our communications, we've been using a lot more of logging notes. And so we started doing it in QuickBooks. However, there's really not a good way to access notes that you're leaving on accounts with ease. And you're so limited with the amount of seats you can have in that platform. So while it's great for the basics of accounting, it just wasn't doing the trick for tracking our communications, especially having so many people involved and being a small startup. So when we implemented Upflow, we really were able to decrease the amount of tools that we were using to communicate. So the great thing was that we weren't limited with how many people can have access to the platform. And it is so easy to access notes and to log email communications, for example, something we do, or logging updates and things of that nature. And it's become now that we really only need to rely on Slack once in a while. We'll have a recurring meeting to just catch up, which we usually end early. But we've gotten to the point where we can now really just focus on agreeing and committing to tracking communications largely in Upflow.
Right. And you have an Excel spreadsheet buried somewhere back there that you might go in. Everyone's got one spreadsheet hanging around.
We do have one spreadsheet, and we do still rely on that. But even with that, as we're going through from a company standpoint, really just modernizing the technology we're using, we're really trying to get away from using the old-fashioned methods of spreadsheets. So from my standpoint in the operations world, I want to try to implement as much automation as possible. So using technology so it does more of the manual work for us. So that's something we're trying to kind of get away from the spreadsheets and rely more on central sources of truth.
Right. Yeah, I feel like when you're moving up towards like a dedicated tool, like one of the big reservations people have is like the change management associated with it. Like they don't want to like ramp up on that. But like it was interesting you said that like as you moved up, like you kind of slowly gotten rid of like the multitude of tools that you were using, right? So like rather than like juggling like 3 or 4 balls, like just get used to having one kind of bigger one, one multifaceted one, and like that can kind of make the difference?
Definitely. It made a huge difference for us. And I think as we were implementing new tools, some of the biggest things that we did that made it easier was putting together simple documentation like a RACI chart. So including all the stakeholders, everyone knows what the process is, what their role is at each point in the process, who's maintaining the platform, who needs to log what. And it made it so clear, and it was much easier to get everyone on board and really see the value and adopt the new process and the new tools.
Right.
Yeah, and just to chime in too, I think the interface itself, as someone that doesn't come from a finance background, it was very easy for me to know where I needed to go to put everything. And it was very intuitive to find the individual accounts that I needed to check in on. And so that really helped me be able to contribute, you know?
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful thing. Cause like, that's like what the spirit of this webinar is, right? Like cash collection is a team effort. So like the tool you use should be like accessible or familiar to people in customer success or sales or different areas of the organization, not someone who has a CPA, right?
Yeah, although they like to use Upflow too.
Yeah, they started to really like it. I think what's so great about the tool is it almost gamifies it and it gets everyone really excited. So where QuickBooks can be, it's just very traditional, this is a very modern platform. And so people are excited to use it. The visuals are there and people just really like to track on it is what we found.
Cash collection as a game. There you go.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we've been going for about close to 30 minutes. We have one more slide left, and obviously we want to get to some questions. So this one's interesting. I think it's really interesting for you, Nicole, because obviously there are common objections when, when we're trying to make cash collection a collaborative team approach. There are people who are reluctant to, right? So like, common ones we get from salespeople is like, my job is to sell, not like collect the cash. Like once I make the sale, it's off to you. You guys have mentioned, of course, the good cop, bad cop. And then some executives, right? Like they might not want this because like they want this sales guy selling and things like that. So Nicole, I know you touched on this, but like whenever this was first introduced and you thought, okay, they asked you, maybe you're going to have to ask the customers you work so hard to create a strong rapport with, ask them for money. Did you have any reservations at first?
Yeah. So, to touch on it, it is always harder to ask for something. And I think the major element that we aligned with as a company is that we were doing this for the overall health of our company. Mm-hmm. And with that in mind, then we want healthy relationships with our clients. And so that includes both the element of making sure that they're getting the best experience possible with the product. And then additionally, making sure that, we in turn are receiving the money we contractually agreed to based on the contract.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Yeah. And so, I could understand that there could be some concerns here from different departments, but as a company to stay in business long term, right, all these elements need to be aligned to be able to maintain healthy businesses.
Right. Again, yeah, like cash flow, cash collection, it's the lifeblood of the business, right? It's what pays the bills. And if you involve everyone in it in an efficient way with a process, then it doesn't really detract from people's core jobs, right? Or it should, we don't think. Well, great. I mean, that's about 30 minutes on the head, which is what we wanted. Now we wanted to open up to questions. So I'm just going to go into the questions tab here. Louise, at what point do you consider the client lost and close the service escalate to legal terms, internal or external? You guys obviously are cemented in your processes. Like, have you ever gotten to a point where you consider like a client lost? Or, I mean, you mentioned like pulling in the CEO to escalate to legal terms, or like, have you guys witnessed any examples of like really extreme cases of delinquency?
Sure. So I think in our process, like from a process standpoint, so we've been really fortunate with our customers. But I would say like our SOP and the way that we think about it is from a customer success side, we don't want to be such a bad cop that we're not talking to the customer. So it's definitely something that we're lucky where we haven't experienced having to escalate to the point of closing the service, which is fantastic and super fortunate for us. But I think it would really come down to what the situation is. And Nicole, I'm sure you could speak to more with your experience on the client side.
Yeah, I really back up everything you said there. I think it's something that you have to assess based on your own health as a company, and then, you know, the direct situation with each particular client.
Right. One here from Jonathan Williams. Nicole and Emma, do you ask your C-level to call, or is it more by email? So like, obviously you guys mentioned that you, I guess it's more like we didn't get into like the different types of channels that you can use in your workflows. I don't know if we touched on that. So yeah, like obviously emails and calls, but would your CEO, an email come from the CEO, or would it be a phone call?
Yes. So in our workflow that we have standardized across all of our accounts, we have the escalation process start with the general notifications, emails coming from Nicole. When it gets to a certain point past due, I think it's 15 days past due, then Nicole will set up time to talk to the customer. And then from there, we do have an automated email that will come from the CEO's email that typically you will get a response 99% of the time. And we rarely have to get that far in the workflow, fortunately. But we've been able to really standardize it with the automation.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Maybe one last one here, and I think this is a really good one. We've tried many times involving our sales team on ARs, but it never really worked. I understand everything else relies on the process, but I find it hums to argue the strategy. Any tips to change? So like speaking to like the reluctancy of account and salespeople to get in on the AR process. One tip I have is just like incentivizing them to, right? Like, you know, end of the year bonus and payouts, it's largely tied to like deal closings. But if you don't collect cash on one of your accounts, then you probably have to make 2 or 3 sales to compensate for that, right? So collecting cash is honestly just as important as opening up new accounts. So I think it's a good way to like help your salespeople understand that like sales is only half the battle. Emma, Nicole, do you have anything on that? How you could maybe entice salespeople or incentivize them into this process?
Yeah. So I think, user adoption, process adoption, it's a hard problem. So from my side, what I found effective is just really appealing to the value to that department or to that role and making it very clear what their role is, how it affects their day-to-day, how it affects the company overall. So really finding that value in their involvement. And again, like incentivizing, I think, getting them in on the platform, like our sales team is on the platform. They're naturally very interested in the numbers, especially with new clients coming on board, making sure the invoices are correct and payments are coming through on time, because they ultimately want to still have some, play in the relationship. So I think if you can explain the value of it and really make it relatable to them, it's much easier to get them to adopt new tools or to adopt new process.
Right. Totally agree. Well, we're about 36 minutes here. Again, Veraset, it was great to have you guys here. You guys have made some great strides, it seems like. And yeah, we'll share the recording with you guys. It was good to have some experts on to join us. And feel free to get in touch. If you have any questions that we didn't answer, feel free to get in touch. We can get some experts chatting with you.
Thanks so much for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye. Bye, everybody.